right now. I'm out right now. You can call me later, 'cause I'm out right now.
All right, guys, thank you for joining me here in another Ask Me Anything video here at We the Governed. My name's Glen Morgan. If you haven't watched one of these before, this is an opportunity for you to type in any questions that you have. No guarantees I'm going to have good answers or that you'll like any of the answers that I give you. But if you do that, depending on the device you have, either down below or possibly on the side, just remember if you hit the at We the Governed, like I say here in this little comment area, if you can do that, it's just a little bit easier for me to sometimes find the questions. Right now, we're just starting. We don't have a lot of questions that are piling up, but typically what happens is I get a lot of questions by the end of the day. By the end of the live stream here, it's hard for me to keep up with them. And I do try to get to as many of them as you can in the order in which you post them. I don't censor questions, but sometimes YouTube does. So if for some reason you don't see your question popping up, think of a way to rephrase it and just repost it up there. But generally, I don't ever actually censor anything. You're watching me live. I don't have the time to get in there and try to censor a question, and I wouldn't do that anyway. So feel free to ask whatever questions you have, and we will do the best we can. The topic that I mentioned here is why are these guys always appear so incompetent? Of course, it may be more than just appearances. That may be exactly what they are, but nevertheless, it's a question to perhaps start the live stream tonight. Now, the other thing I was going to mention is that I had usually what I do is I try to write out a list of any places and kind of announce it here on the live stream that I'll be speaking in public if you want to come meet me in the wild, as somebody said when they ran into me at Costco one day. But if you want to go out and actually see me at an event, I know I'm going to be at the Patriots Picnic out in Bremerton, which is going to be on August 15th. I can't remember where that is, but I know if you look that up, Patriots Picnic, you'll be out there. I believe that's at the Kitsap Pistol and Rifle Club. If I remember right, that's usually where it is. Gosh, if I'm wrong about that, I will correct myself in one of the next live streams that I do, but it's going to be out there probably from noon to probably 4. I think that's how it's scheduled. I might have to leave there just a little early. I know I'll be speaking out there, but I might have to leave there just a little early at the end of that event just because I also believe that I'm going to go up and be in Redmond at the Freedom Fest, which is going to be scheduled later that day, and I believe that's at Brian Haywood's farm. So I think there's a booth I'm going to be working up there too, just trying to talk to people and meet people all over the state. And that happens to be a busy day. That's a Saturday. Other than that, I am not looking at any events that I have on the schedule right now. So my fault, but I remember that's probably one of the events I have coming up. And that's an opportunity for you to come and meet me in person. Even though you're probably, most of you on this channel only see me when I'm actually doing videos, a good percentage of the time I'm actually out in the field doing different things, working on investigations or other projects or training, and that's actually where I probably spend most of my time. But I do like producing videos and getting feedback from people this way. It's an effective way to reach a lot of people that may not be able to go to those other meetings or events or training sessions. So now, let me just answer my own question that I asked as far as the topic of the video. And I'm actually working on a couple other videos that I'm not done with the prep for, but I'm hoping to produce them tonight and probably launch them as this week goes by. I mean, one of the other issues that has raised its head here recently, and it kind of is related a little bit to the what we saw in Seattle, just kind of this unfolding fiasco of incompetence at the Seattle mayor's office, which is probably no surprise, but also the political posturing. You had Pramila Jayapal, you had Bob Ferguson, you had some of these other people who wanted to be there, and the Mayor Wilson was a silly, just put on this ridiculous display. You saw the police chief practically get in a fight with the journalists. You saw them hold off on providing any information for about 5-6 hours or so as they were trying to collect the dignitaries, as the police called it, as they were trying to get Bob Ferguson and everybody else to do their photo op up there. And, of course, the bizarre and strange way of saying that a gang shooting, an obvious unquestionable gang shooting, that instead that it was a group of people shooting or something like that. Like they were trying to implement some kind of stupid, typical wokester sort of, modification of the language in some way that's kind of their Orwellian way that they do in Seattle to try to pretend like it was something different than what it really was. An underage juvenile criminal group of people decided to shoot at another one who apparently, based on some of the preliminary reports, seems like he was not a good guy either. And they tried to shoot it up. One of them died. Of course, they're not exactly skilled in the use of firearms. And so inevitably they hit a number of people there who were also, I believe, 4 other people were wounded. And they were innocent bystanders, of course, because not like these guys know what they're doing exactly. And how could this possibly happen? Because this is a gun-free zone. Seattle tells us it's a gun-free zone. They passed this law long ago. The Seattle Science Center is a gun-free zone. Nobody's allowed to have firearms there. How could they possibly have it? But of course, for some strange and odd reason, the criminals just don't follow their dumb rules, and inevitably it just makes it a free fire zone because there's no way anybody's going to be able to defend themselves when 2 crazy, totally, bad guys decide to shoot it out in a public space like that. Now, it's been a while since I've been at a bite of Seattle. It's been quite a few years, but I used to enjoy going to those when I was younger. And it's kind of a classic thing to do. And, fortunately for, looks like that they caught one of the shooters. They're still looking for another one, and one of them died. But the police responded right away because they were already there walking around at the bite of Seattle. But it is important to remember that the state senator that lives there, Noel Frame, has done her best to try to find ways to release more violent, young, juvenile, violent criminals into Seattle as she possibly can. She's sponsored a bill multiple times now that would actually let juveniles convicted of murder or killing other people or armed robbery or things like that, really violent crimes, that they would have an opportunity to get released early so they could go out and do more of it. And she has been an advocate for promoting that, and that is exactly the profile, the type of people that shot up the bite of Seattle just recently. And one of the problems you have here is that this soft-on-crime approach that Democrats universally have, and frankly, the King County Prosecutor's Office has exhibited this along with the judges, where they won't prosecute these guys, is keep releasing them time and time again and putting them back out on the street. And inevitably, once the criminals realize there's 0 consequences for their behavior, they're just going to keep doing it because that's what gang members do. That's what criminals do. I know that's a surprise. Probably if you're a Democrat watching the show, you may be surprised that criminals will actually commit crimes and that gang members will actually shoot each other. But that's what happens. And it is a tragic and a terrible thing that happened there. Now, the other weird part about, there was a bunch of weird things actually on this whole thing. I read an article that obviously everybody's trying to get out of the way when these guys are shooting at each other. And one of the things that also was disturbing was that many of these booths, if you've been to the Bite of Seattle, a lot of times there's each of these booths, vendors providing samples of food, and you're kind of be able to go from vendor booth to vendor booth. And, of course, they're running away when the shooting goes on. And when they came back, their booths had been looted. So to add insult to injury, beyond just the tragic nightmare of crime playing out in full color and obvious in front of everybody, they also then had their place looted after they had to run away from the bad event. So anyway, not exactly Seattle in its best light, and just a few days after the World Cup soccer's kind of gone away and Seattle's letting itself to go into full decay mode again, which is the default setting under Mayor Wilson, of course. And they don't exactly look like they're terribly competent people. And the more incompetent that they appear, the more people are wondering, well, is it incompetence or is it corruption? And many of you who have paid attention or been at some of my presentations when I'm discussing the nature of bureaucracy realize that my definition for government bureaucracy in particular, but it really just applies collectively to the whole approach and experiment of modern government, is that essentially the best way to truly understand how government operates is to recognize that it essentially is a mountain of corruption that's concealed by an ocean of incompetence. And there's fish in the sea, trying to swim around, do good things. But mostly you're swimming through incompetence, trying to find the inevitable massive amount of corruption that exists just under the surface. And the primary defense when you expose corruption in government is that it's a pretty reasonable defense that they bring up, as they say, we are not corrupt, we're just completely incompetent. And that's a very believable defense, because most people who have had any interaction with government, you realize that they probably are incompetent, and most of the time they are. But unfortunately, a lot of corruption conceals itself by that ocean of incompetence in which it exists. So they'll say that they're not incompetent, or not corrupt, they're just incompetent. Now, they don't want to admit that they're incompetent right out of the gate, but anybody who's got any sense of what's going on, they're incompetent. If you don't believe me, just go down. There's a lot of different tests you can have. One of my favorite tests you can usually do to see just how incompetent and dishonest that government can be with you is go down to your local planning department. In most cases, ask them how much it would cost to do whatever, fill in the blank. Something that's a little bit more complex than just a minor change at the house, but something that requires a permit to be issued by that city or county. And you're going to discover that what they tell you, the cost or the price or the time or the response isn't actually what happens. And there's some kinds of good example of that, where they pretty much lie to you every time. If you go in there, I've heard thousands of just nightmare stories where people just doing basic, fundamental, minor things on their property end up paying 5-10 times what the county says it's going to be, because of all the little games they play. And it appears like they're being incompetent, but they're just lying to you to start out with, because they need you to sink a lot of your money into their operation there, because they're using those fees to pay their salaries. And they're worried that if you pay the actual amount that they advertise that it costs to get it done, that they'd be out of work because they wouldn't have enough money coming in. So instead, what they do is lie to you and structure it in a way that you never get your permit. It takes years instead of just a couple weeks, and that none of the process that they define to you makes any sense. It's not rational, and they mislead you. They send you down all kinds of different false paths, and you end up paying a lot of extra money to get a permit that supposedly costs a much smaller amount and would be issued in a shorter period of time. So that's just a good test you can do, but you don't need that. You can just go and look at almost anything that government's doing where you live, and how screwed up and wasteful and incompetent it is. So you got plenty of examples of those all over the place, and the more you look into it, well, it's like being black-pilled. You're not going to be able to unsee what you see, and then you will understand why some of us just want to reduce the size of government and reduce the bloated waste that government has become. All right, let's get into a couple of the questions here. Let me increase the pop-out chat, and let's see what questions you have today for me, and hopefully I didn't miss anything. I was caught up in doing some research today a little bit, so I might be a day behind the news on a couple things. So if there's something that I am not aware of, then I'll get to it, and for some reason I'm having oh, there it is. Okay. All right, let's just jump right in here. First question. Not a question. Kinematic J. Kitsap Rifle and Revolver Club, correct. Okay, so I was right about where I'll be on the 15th. And I know that's an opportunity, by the way, that you can also talk to a lot of other local elected officials running for office. Now, at that point in time, you're post-primary, and so those people, well, it is election season in Washington State. That lasts about a month and a half, I think, in the primary, so you'll still be in counting mode, secret sauce counting mode, black box voting at the auditor's offices at that point in time. But it will be an opportunity to meet whoever's probably made it through that primary and moving on to the general election. So you probably have an opportunity to meet a number of those elected officials there. And you can see me speak and talk to me probably, because they usually do a pretty good job with their picnic there. Nick, first question here. Jason Fisher, 1530. Good evening. Hope you had a great day today. Will the state play musical chairs with income tax ballot initiative? Be enough to sink it. RIP to the Seattle victims. Shame on sleazy politicians. Yes. Well, here's the thing, and there's two different issues that go on with an initiative process. The ballot title debate that occurs, and this is an ongoing fight that's been going on in Washington State for a couple decades, is that obviously if you're going to file an initiative to do something on the ballot, that there's a title that inevitably goes and attaches to that initiative. And that title has a legal process that you go through to challenge that it's accurately representing what's on the initiative, to challenge that it's it is done in a way that's not confusing, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different things. And what happens is the sponsor of the initiative provides a suggested, usually they provide a suggested title to it. Now they have to provide what the actual legislation is, but you turn it in. Essentially it goes through a code revisor's office where they make sure that the legislation, the way that it's written, fits the code and that it does what it says it's going to do. And then the Attorney General's office is the point entity, the responsible party for producing the ballot title itself. And it's also a brief description. There's a couple things they have to do. So they issue that for you. And then when they send it to you, you decide there's an appeal process that goes in a rocket docket in the court system. So it's supposed to be responded to pretty quickly. And you can argue or dispute the title. Now, not just you, anybody who any citizen or entity essentially can also challenge that title. And so that's usually resolved in the first, even though the statute says 5 days, the truth is it can be drug out. There's a lot of different games that are played. Sometimes they drag it out longer. People who are opposed to that initiative oftentimes try to drag it out a little bit longer because they're trying to delay the window of time in which you have to collect signatures. And so regardless, I've been in that. I've been one of the guys filing those challenges in Thurston County Court, and I've challenged ballot titles before myself, so I know what this is like. And you go through that process, but it's a fairly legal process. Sure, the Thurston County judges are terrible. Most of them are completely sold. They're sold long ago to the government bureaucracy, so they're just essentially puppets of the state. They don't care about your freedoms or the Constitution or your rights. But every now and then, some of them will be willing to actually argue about language. It is a more preferable way to spend their time on the bench arguing about language, which is sort of related to why they became a judge in the first place, rather than trying to listen to the next divorce decree or small claims court or whatever it is they're having to deal with. And so sometimes it's a little bit more interesting to them. It's kind of a nice. The other thing, the reason why they like it is that the Superior Court decision of that judge isn't appealable. So whatever the judge does, it can't be appealed to a higher level. So you get one shot to make that title resolved. And so what happens is then that's what goes on the signature sheets, and that's what you're collecting signatures for. Sometimes those titles can be confusing as written by the Attorney General's office. They've certainly played games with this before. We saw this issue with Tim Eyman's $30 car tabs. We've seen this with other cases in the past. However, a lot of that, you have, especially with the Let's Go Washington group, you got a lot of attorneys that are reviewing this and going over the stuff. They go out and collect signatures, they submit it, which is where the process is right now. One of the things that Democrats were particularly upset about for 2 decades in the state is that pretty much not every time, but almost every time, the citizens had an initiative that would reduce taxes or make it harder to raise taxes. They were upset because that was obviously restricting the gravy train of waste that they were hoping the trough they planned to feed at, and they didn't like it. And the voters of Washington State would oftentimes vote for those lower taxes, property taxes or car tabs or 2/3 requirements or whatever it is. So it was very frustrating to the political establishment and the insiders and the lobbyists because this would reduce some of the cash that they were able to extract from citizens in Washington State. And surprise, surprise, voters of Washington usually don't want higher taxes, especially when they see how those tax dollars are typically squandered and wasted by the bureaucrats and the politicians who are in charge. So a couple years ago, the Democrats, once they had a large enough majority in both the House and the Senate, decided they were going to push through these public impact statements, which is different than the title. And what it is they only apply to initiatives that reduce the taxes that are coming in. They don't apply to initiatives that increase taxes, of course. They apply to initiatives that are going to reduce those taxes. And so this is the way that the Attorney General puts its own kind of corrupt political motivations on the scale of the process, the voting process, to push it down to discourage people from voting for initiatives are going to repeal taxes. And we ran into this in 2024, first year that they were really applied, because these impact statements were put on most of the Let's Go Washington initiatives at that time to repeal the Climate Commitment Act scam, to repeal a bunch of these other tax scams, all of which is money that's being stolen and wasted from us every day now. And the confusing language that was put on the ballot made it sound like, oh no, if we cut these taxes, of course, kids are going to die. It'll be chaos in the streets. It'll be horrible. It'll cut money from kids. That's usually what they said. Even if none of that money actually goes to support children, they pretend like it does. And so that was the argument. And it worked, especially if you had a $50 million campaign behind it, which they did. And you were able to kind of, tell people, don't vote for this, because if you vote for this, you're going to reduce, kids will lose all their money for education, or usually it's something like that. Yes, there is going to be something like that on the income tax initiative. There isn't going to be something like that on the other two initiatives, the Protect Girls Sports and the Restore Transparency for Parents or Communicate with Parents initiatives that'll also be on the ballot. And so they write up the predictable, even though none of this money from this income tax is going to happen for years, they're pretending as though the future revenue would actually be used to help children or education or something like that. And so they make that pretense. They pretend like that's how the money's going to be spent. So they argue with the Attorney General, Nick Brown's group, a statement that will be on the ballot to make it sound like, yes, if you vote for this, you're going to reduce money for kids and children and healthcare or something. So that's the element that's confusing. It's not musical chairs. It's going to be a language, this impact statement that'll be on the ballot for that initiative. So generally, just the thing to remember is if you want lower taxes, you vote yes. So vote yes, pay less. It's still a pretty good rule to live by when it comes to the initiatives like this. And the other two initiatives, you can vote yes to, because those are both reasonable common sense improvements in the state. So anyway, we'll see. We'll see what happens there. This is a second question here. I'm going to jump right into it. This is Michael Case, 8231, and both Jason and Michael are common commenters. You guys always log in and ask great questions, so I appreciate your comments, or your questions, I should say. Is the Seattle Police Chief really a resident of Chicago? And if so, is he registered to vote in both Washington and Illinois? I believe he actually is a resident of Chicago, but definitely if he isn't, and he's technically a resident in Seattle, his family still lives in Chicago. And so he's obviously commuting back to see his family, or they're commuting to see him sometimes, and which means he's probably not terribly committed to Seattle. But also, I don't know if you could blame him. Look at how fast they get rid of police chiefs in Seattle anyway, and how miserable it is to be a police chief there. Not probably as miserable as it is to be a police chief in Chicago, but nevertheless, it is. And so he's probably got his foot in both camps, kind of trying to, and he gets paid a lot, so he can afford to do that a little bit. Maybe he can't afford to fly back every weekend, which he says he doesn't do. But he may have changed his voter registration. Remember, we have loosey-goosey, slipshod voter registration processes in Washington. So even if he does live in Chicago and he's voting here, considering who he is, probably they've never enforced that law anyway. Washington State does a terrible job enforcing or cleaning up their voter rolls, so don't expect them to ever enforce it in a case like this. But it did raise its ugly head in that whole press conference, and his response was weird and certainly lacking all self-control. And my guess is that the Seattle Police Chief may not be that much longer for Seattle, judging from the blowback that he's getting from being such a hothead at a journalist who really wasn't doing anything extreme at all. It's kind of ridiculous. Andrea, 1198, have you heard about the ballot problems in Spokane County? Yes, I have. We can talk about that. Some had tax measures either missing or wrongly included in the wrong districts. And how will we know that it is sorted out, that properly? I'm going to add in your second part of that question. So, yeah, and what this case is that lest you believe that the auditors know what they're doing in Washington State. And listen, some of them are going to try to do the best they can, but screw-ups happen. We've seen the Kitsap County auditors screw up a neighborhood in Bremerton. I remember a couple years back, it was and it had more to do with GIS conversion on voter maps, where a neighborhood was actually wrongly included in a jurisdiction, and so or wrongly included or wrongly excluded. I can't remember what that case was. And eventually, the person who lost the race felt that they should have had those votes. and they fought it out, and they were correct. The auditor was wrong. But in the end, they did correct it in future votes, but nobody went back and really changed the election because they'd made that screw up. Now, in this case, in Spokane, it's more dramatic, and it is a much larger, gosh, I want to say it was about 6,000 people, if I remember right, were they were sent the wrong, essentially, they were miscategorized into the wrong taxing district or excluded from the correct taxing district. I can't remember what it was. And there were two categories of voter in that case. And so they've had to send out replacement or corrected votes. And then there's been this question raised as to how in the heck can Spokane actually address whether or not they get two votes from the same person, whether or not which vote counts, which ballot counts. It's a total mess. It's kind of a perfect way for Vicki Dalton, who's serving out her last term as the Spokane County Auditor, to demonstrate her competency in that position. And it has been a mess. There are and well-known problems right now, and she'll make it worse. And this is kind of a perfect capstone kind of year for her as the county auditor. And replacing her is going to be a good thing in Spokane County. And I'm really glad to see her go. She has never been good, never been transparent, and never been that effective. And this kind of just demonstrates this level of incompetence. Usually it's not this obvious, but nevertheless, it is a problem. And it requires vigilance. I'm going to point out there were some good activists out there that had been identifying some problems when they converted over to the map to GIS system a number of years ago. And it put these some homes and some addresses in the wrong place. It was 2018, I think, that we found a precinct in King County that had done this in Federal Way as well, but it was much more limited. It was like three houses that were counted in different precincts a couple times, in both precincts, and it was hard it took a while for them to sort it out. This was discovered actually on a hand recount that was forced on them after litigation. Back then, it was just as a statistical sampling method to try to figure out what's going on with the voting systems in King County. It started before it was cool in 2020, and it was one of those issues we ran into. Earlier this year, I had some reports from the logic and accuracy test in King County that clearly identified screw-ups with their voting machines, double counting the same ballot. And the issue in Spokane right now that they are concerned about with this problem is that they may be getting double counting or ballots that are being essentially counted twice. Same people sending in two ballots. And why that matters is that obviously anybody sending in an illegal ballot or a ballot that's not that they're not supposed to get is essentially canceling out a legal ballot. And if it's a close election, which it might be, that is a significant impact and certainly reason to fix and redo that election. We'll see what happens. They don't like that. They don't like admitting that they're wrong, but they clearly are, and there's some problems there. Let's see. Good Runner 1. There's a House bill coming up, HB 1938, that wants to replace our state flag to represent the Indian tribes, just like Minnesota replaced their flag to represent the Somalia. Thoughts on that? Well, I hate any idea of replacing the Washington state flag. It's been this way for quite a while, and I don't think there's any reason to replace it in Washington. So, yeah, that's a dumb bill. It was proposed last time, and if I remember, I didn't really go anywhere, so I'm not sure. Essentially what you're talking about is a bill that rolls over, but I actually am not sure that it does stay in this next legislative session. So unless somebody early filed it, which I don't think you can do yet, got to double check that in my mind. I think we're a little too early for early filed bills. I think we're a month away from being able to do that, but maybe I'm wrong. So I'm not sure that bill is actually still alive. Remember, we have a part-time legislature here, so they don't go back into legislative session and start taking away your freedoms and your liberties and your tax dollars until January. And it'll be a long session next year, so it's going to start the 2-year biennium, essentially, where they have 2 legislative sessions, one for 90 days, one for 60 days, business days technically, and it'll start in January of this next year. So right now, if there's a bill left over from the 2026 legislative session, it is not automatically rolled into 2027. It has to be refiled. But it is a dumb, bad idea. I would oppose it, and everybody who supports it should be widely mocked, and that bill should be widely mocked in Olympia. It's a good thing to do with it. Jason Fisher, 1530. What's your opinion on Pickaxe Mountain? To bomb or to raid? That's the question of life. Well, and what you're referring to there, Jason's referring to, of course, in Iran, Pickaxe Mountain. Everybody's talking about this as the potential location for secret Iranian underground nuclear missile development programs, or maybe the storing enriched uranium or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, obviously, the military probably has looked at a couple of different approaches that they would take there. And you're asking me as though there's only two options to bomb or raid it. And there's always a third option, which is don't do anything and just keep an eye on it. But I don't know. Probably if it was me and I felt like I needed to do something, I'd probably just bomb it at this point in time. I think that's probably the safest thing to do. I think this place, but of course we'll have to see what they decide to do. Raiding it is always risky because it's a lot more logistical support that you need to implement to get a team of people there to take over the place, go in and get out the enriched uranium, which I think was the argument that they were hoping for or to make to justify doing a raid. And if it is already buried in some from previous impacts there, then it's not going to be easy to get through that. You have to like drop in heavy equipment and mine your way back in, which I think is what the Iranians are actually doing there. But we'll have to see. Obviously, we'll just have to see what happens there. Christy and Mike Fisk, 6452. Did you see the ballots where one person received two, one with a middle initial, and one forwarded to someone in Montana? I sent a message on Facebook, and what can we do? Yeah, I did actually see that one. And in fact, there's been a number of points out there where people have received multiple ballots. And this I find terribly disturbing. And let me explain one of the reasons why this happens that is not necessarily nefarious, but clearly an indication of why mail-in voting, especially all mail-in voting, the way Washington State has it, is the worst possible system that you could ever possibly set up for voting. Second worst, I guess. Electronic voting would be the worst, so just purely voting online. However, this is second worst, and it's bad because what they're doing is they distribute ballots like confetti at a parade, widely distributed with no chain of custody or clarity as to the fact that anybody gets it. Does the post office throw it in the dumpster, or do they actually deliver it, or in the ditch? Is it stolen from the mailbox? Is the person for whom it's intended actually the person who fills it out and sends it back? There's all kinds of problems with that. And one of the issues is the Department of Licensing has historically been really bad at this. When you go in to renew your driver's license, they'll frequently re-register you to vote, even though you're already registered to vote. And they'll do it if there's any change at all, and adding an initial would be a good example of that. Sometimes married, somebody gets married, changes their last name, they'll start getting two ballots, one in their maiden name and one in their married name, two different voter IDs. That was one of the questions there on this particular story, was whether those were for different voter IDs. Now, the Montana one was a different element, which is that somebody's moved and they're requesting those ballots be forwarded to their address in Montana or wherever they moved to. So they're still voting after they've moved out of the state. That is a common problem. Secretary of State pretends like it doesn't happen. It happens all the time. And part of it is the loosey-goosey, slipshod way that we actually consider residency when it comes to voting in Washington State. You can pick a postage stamp of land somewhere in Washington and pretend like that's where you live and claim your residency there, even though there's no evidence that you live there at all. And in most cases, Washington State's going to allow that to happen. In fact, I could get the closest 5 million friends of mine from Texas to decide to claim that they live in a park in Seattle, and they could all register to vote from that park. And then all those ballots could be mailed to Texas, and they could fill them out and send them back. And do you know, Washington State would suddenly become the most conservative state in America because of that. And theoretically, with the incompetent and foolish approach that they take to how they do voter registration and domicile address, how they're defining a domicile there, and technically that's not even illegal. It should be. most of us recognize that it's not following the letter of the law or certainly the spirit of the law, but that hasn't prevented King County and Whatcom County and San Juan County and Spokane and Clark and all these from allowing people to register at gas stations or in homeless camps or nonprofit shelters or whatever and get registered to vote there. Now, listen, sometimes when we've audited these, we've seen that a lot of those ballots don't get voted, but sometimes they do, and there's absolutely no way you can go back and verify that person ever filled it out. It's just like the unusual high percentage of people that vote from an SEIU-managed mental institution or old folks home or something like that, where they won't let you come in and see exactly what the heck they're doing with those ballots, but somehow, mysteriously, the SEIU employees seem to fill them all out, and somehow they always seem to vote for Democrats. And I'm sure that's purely a mystifying, coincidence that has nothing to do with the fact that all of them used to be Republicans until they moved into that facility. And there's a question there, and there should be. But again, with no chain of custody and no way to actually have voting in person where you get to go and vote behind the curtain, have a secret ballot. In Washington State, it's a free-for-all. Nobody knows for sure what's going on. It is one of the problems why we have mail-in voting questions. And by design, it's not designed well. So there is some work that needs to be done. Let's see. Christy and Mike Fisk, 6452. My friend never received a ballot. She printed it off online, but was told just put it in a regular envelope. Nothing secure. Yes, that's exactly how they will let you vote. You could write it on a toilet paper, and as long as they could try to figure out who you were supposedly voting for, provided that they could identify who you were, they would allow and accept that as a ballot. Now, what they do at the auditor's office when they get these weird things, and it doesn't happen a lot, so it's not like a huge number, but they'll get something in like that. They'll try to go to determine voters' intent. These are the perfect, canvassing board review where they kind of put on a kabuki theater pretending like they care about how understanding original voter intent. And listen, some of the people involved truly do, and they're really trying to sort this out. But obviously, you could eliminate these problems if you corrected the statute and changed how it worked. I wouldn't personally do that. If for some reason I didn't get my ballot, I would actually drive down. I'd go to the auditor's office and I'd get one there as a replacement ballot if that happened. Again, something that wouldn't happen if you were doing in-person precinct voting. But it is an issue, and they will accept those votes. Theoretically, they are double checking to make sure that you hadn't sent in some other ballot or that it doesn't cancel it out or somebody else didn't get it for you. This is one of the questions I've had with the people who are getting the duplicate ballots. There's probably nothing in that system, it does depend on which county you're in, that would prevent the both ballots from not, once they're separated from the envelope, from just being counted. So, and who's really checking on that? Well, who knows? It doesn't seem like it's consistent all the time. It does depend most likely on what county you're in and whether that would be accepted. Let's see. Jason Fisher, 1530. What state legislative races could we make headway? Any chances of moderation and from voters? Yes, I would say the 42nd Ledge District in North Whatcom County is a good place where you could have some reasonably good people get into office and replace the crazies who are currently in there. I think the 26th Ledge District is kind of tip of the spear, which is down in kind of that Gig Harbor area. Kind of Gig Harbor, Bremerton area down there. That's a really good district as well, where you could see Republican pickups. The 10th legislative district, which is up in Island County, is also another one that's widely recognized as a split district where Republicans can go either way. There's more long shot districts in other places, the 28th, the 30th, which is Federal Way, and the 28th is actually South Pierce County. The 47th, for example, which is Eastern King, that's oftentimes been a potential swing district. There are a couple other legislative districts up north. I want to say it's like the 44th. I went up and spoke at a kickoff event up there in Monroe. And so you have a couple different places where there's the 5th Ledge District has always been considered a battleground district. We have had Republicans there, Issaquah and now it's Enumclaw linked into that district. So these are places. The Clark County race, I'm always mixing up the 17th and the 18th there, but one of those seats as well. And then you have these other long shot races. And listen, the long shots, people running these long shot races, and I say long shot because historically some of these districts, even in low turnout primary elections, which is what we're looking at right now, the Republicans have historically not been able to prevail in those districts. The third district, which is basically downtown Spokane, just kind of that little island of horrific voting in eastern Washington, where the downtown Spokane seems to always decide to put in terrible Democrats, just like they have a terrible mayor right now. So, the right kind of candidate at the right time could make a difference and swing it a little differently. And you have these other seats like that are a little bit harder to predict. It really does depend on the type of candidate you have running for office. The primary election results, they really do matter. Even if you look at it and you say those two people are going to make it through, still vote for the one you like, because if they do better than anticipated or expected, even in one of these districts that wasn't originally considered a swing, but they demonstrate a return that's high enough to encourage people to support them more. You know, they got 48% of the vote, or maybe even more. It looks like they prevailed even and even though it's a beauty contest primary, it would be enough to possibly inspire a much more significant and aggressive campaign moving forward. So I think it's important. But those are the districts where most likely partisan modification as to who's in those positions that would shift. The 24th out on the peninsula has always kind of been another one as well. You got Port Townsend, you got Sequim and Port Angeles that you have to overcome out there, but that district is a potential swing. It really depends how active the DSA is, the Democrat Socialists of America, who pretty much own Port Townsend, Sequim, and Port Angeles. So if you can overcome whatever fraud operations they're running, then there's an opportunity to flip those areas as well. Jason Fisher, 1530. No worries, Glenn. I appreciate you reading my question, no matter how technical. I don't know that I did a good job on that, Jason. I'll try to do my best. Trying to get to questions here. Jason Fisher, 1530 again. King County enacts ethics reforms after audit. Investigation reveal questionable spending. Yeah, I mean, this was silly. And this isn't a question, but it should be. Where in the heck is the money going in King County? Because it isn't going to whatever you've been told that they were going to get the money and spend it on. Obviously, a bunch of it disappeared, and especially in the homeless industrial complex / social services area, whether it's, God, what was it? It was the one where they had all that money went missing, and they aren't sure where it went because they can't even audit it. The books are unauditable, I guess was what the word they said. And what's funny about this is that if you've ever seen the audits that are done by the state auditor, I mean, they're weak, they're wimpy, they're not really an audit. It's kind of like a gold star operation where they're just trying to go out and check a box and to pretend that all is well. You have to do something egregiously foolish and crazy, or you have to be a Republican for them to actually step in and do like a serious, really dig in for real. They have an audit team at the state auditor's office. It's pretty good, but it's like their specialist team. They bring in when they're pretty sure there's fraud that's happened here, and they're just simply trying to find the scope of it. But they keep that team away from places like state offices or any politically sensitive place where a Democrat could potentially get in trouble. And King County has its own audit function, and to be honest, they had a really good, brave auditor who's probably been drummed out of there now, who did expose some of this fraud, open and obvious fraud that was going on there. And then, of course, what King County's realizing is they get national mockery for being just a black pit of corruption. So the response is they're trying to pretend like they care about this, and they're going to have like an ethics reform, and they're going to start to do some of the stuff. It's been done before. It's not real. Nobody involved in it really believes what they're doing. And it is a concern and a problem because it puts on this edifice and pretense that you're actually caring about how the taxpayer money is being squandered or wasted, when in reality you're just trying to put conceal it and put a pretty bow on it and convince the voters that despite all evidence to the contrary, somehow your tax dollars are actually ending up where you told the voters they would be, and that it wasn't wasted, stolen, or squandered along the way, even though we know that it was. So we'll see if King County is able to convince anybody. I don't know who's gullible enough to really believe it, but there's obviously people who believe they can profit from them, so they'll probably pretend like it was done correctly. Pam, S5S2X. Any updates on the DOL lawsuit and driver's licenses? Should people request updated licenses to help protect from possible identity theft? I did a little quick video on this a couple days ago, I think. And you've read about it. If you you can Google this, and you can see the tort report. There's an attorney that's involved in this case, and I believe it was Joel Ard that was the lead attorney on this case, exposing the Department of Licensing misuse of driver's licenses, and obviously exposing them to ID theft operations with willful and malicious intent, like with total knowledge that that's what they were doing. It really doesn't look good for the Department of Licensing. Now, I will point out that they stopped doing this in January of 2025. So we're about 18 months in, and they started doing it back in 2018. I don't remember the month. But it had been open door, and fraud and scam artists and organized crime people were doing this, by the thousands, right? Tens of thousands. So we don't know how many people actually had their identity stolen, but the class, essentially, the tort claim in that lawsuit is the class is everybody who had a driver's license between 2018 and 2025, or at least January 2025. You could get an updated license if you wanted to now. I don't know that would change anything at this point in time, but we'll have to see. I think there will be some other, if you look at that court case right now, I'm more curious to see how the state responds, and they've been not wanting to respond. There's obviously, it looks like a bunch of discovery's been filed, and the state still has to provide discovery in that case, and we have to see how they respond. And I'm curious about that, because there's no doubt they're guilty. It's just a question of how they'll try to mitigate the guilt and the damage that they've already done. So we'll have to see. PAW, Paulo Gris, 1675. The Snake River is one of the biggest transportation hubs from Lewiston, Idaho to the Oregon coast. Most, if not all, of the wheat that gets harvested is loaded onto barges there. And that is true. And you actually had two comments on this, but the reason why I read this, and it isn't a question, but I'll tell you why I read this out. I did a little short. My favorite video format isn't the live stream, and it isn't the shorts that I've been doing a lot of those shorts, but it's the more longer form formats. And the reason is you can just provide more information. It's easier to provide source links and other data in that type of setting. And that's the type of video I've been doing for a long time. Most of the 1,000 videos or so that I've done are those types of videos. However, I screwed up and I made a mistake, mostly by omission, not what I said that was wrong, but I omitted a really key piece in my justification for why we want to keep the Snake River dams. Now, I had three things that I talked about and emphasized in that video, all three of which are accurate. One is that they produce, cheap, inexpensive, and environmentally friendly power, right? Hydropower, and Washington State's the only state in America that pretends like that's not a renewable resource. But people who aren't corrupt and that have a sense of reality, they know that that's a renewable resource, especially considering the rainfall that we get in our state and the snowfall that adds up over time. So number one, cheap hydropower, it's already there. Why would we take that out and eliminate it, especially with the increasing needs of power? Number two, the irrigation that's provided by these dams in the summer months, when normally that water would rage through and then drop to a much lower level, but the ability to have the reservoirs fill to a certain level and maintain them and use the excess water as irrigation has opened up massive amounts of agricultural land all over central and west and eastern Washington, anywhere near the Snake River. So from an irrigation standpoint, that's really good. Also, the other thing is flood control. Flood control is obvious because in my grandpa's era, that river flooded, and just like the Columbia, it used to flood. Horrible floods, terribly destructive, crazy floods from a big watershed. And when they would get lots of rain and melting snowfall sometimes combined, they would really cause a lot of damage. And so the reservoir dams would end up moderating and controlling the flooding operations that you'd have there and really make it a lot less destructive and harmful. Here's what I missed in my mistake in that video. I didn't talk about the transportation benefits that you had there, especially for bulk transportation. Barge transportation is the lowest cost way to move by ton almost anything out there, particularly agricultural products, which are dominantly what goes down the Snake River. Wheat, and I believe I can't remember how much soy we have over there, but it's mostly wheat that you're actually moving in those barges. And there's some other agricultural crops too, but mostly it's wheat. So you're able to move them at a much lower cost, more efficient than any other transportation method you could have out there. And so I failed to mention the obvious benefit that represents that can't be replaced if they take the dams out. So instead, they would have to start transporting by either rail or probably more likely trucks, which would greatly increase the amount of trucks on the road, provided those agricultural operations could still operate without water. So the Enviro is trying to push this removal of the Snake River Dam. Don't care that they're pushing delusionally insane, self-destructive, and state-destructive policies. They're happy for that. They enjoy pushing those policies. That's all they do. But they're really looking for the grift of being able to be involved in these studies so that they can keep getting paid to achieve very little except virtue signal and posture on tribal reservations and to Evergreen State College students and others. Recently, the Climate Commitment Act, which is just one big pot of grift, they just put a ton of money into another study on the dams, which is really just a way to pay off a bunch of leftists so that they can pretend to be doing something productive when they've already written study in advance, and they're simply going to put this report out that it doesn't mean anything more than it did before it was put out. So anyway, I did make a mistake by failing to talk about the transportation benefits of the dams as another reason, of course, to keep them. So removing the dams is a dumb, bad idea. It's a destructive idea. It isn't good for anything, and other than some political insiders who might think they can profit from it. Let's see. Jason Fisher, 1530. What's your thoughts on Brian Koberger? Oh, yeah, pushing to overturn his guilty plea. So those of you who may not know, and I can't imagine you don't know something about it, there was this horrible murder case that came out of University of Idaho where a Central Washington University, Wazoo student, WSU student over there, drove across the border into Idaho and killed 4 University of Idaho students. 3 of them were girls. One of them was a boyfriend sleeping over. And, these girls had a very high, they were all Washingtonians, I believe. He was actually originally from Pennsylvania, but he was going there getting a criminology degree, kind of a weird guy, but nevertheless, and so you would think that he knew how to cover his tracks better. He probably did, but inevitably it was a horrible story because, of course, it's every parent's nightmare or student's nightmare, and it sounds like a horror story where he snuck into this party house that and then ended up killing 4 people. Maybe that wasn't his intention. Maybe he was only planning to kill 1, but he came in there with a knife and a mask, so he's planning to do some damage, and he ended up killing 4 of them. And he did plead guilty in that case, and that's what took the death penalty off the table in the murder trial that was ongoing over in Idaho. Now, of course, after he's been sentenced to life in prison in Idaho, he's now trying just another tactic to try to reverse his guilty plea and file a not guilty plea or try to go through some kind of an argument like that. I personally don't think that's going to necessarily go anywhere, but he's hardly the first guy that's tried this, and it makes the news because it was obviously such a horrific crime, and so we'll have to see. Mark Hansen, 8230. I still wish that you would run for governor of Washington. Yeah, no, I'm not going to run for governor of Washington. Listen, I'm not even totally sure. There's policies. I would love to help a Republican governor. And let's face it, the only sanity you're ever going to get in the governor's office again in Washington State is going to have to be somebody with an R next to their name. Not because Republicans are angels and perfect, but it's because that's the only opposition of any substance that exists in the state. And so if you had somebody like, say, a Brian Haywood get into office or some other Republican, I'd love to work for somebody like that to help clean up and downsize the state. My favorite job in government would be to downsize government, to fire lots and lots of employees, to downsize the state, to cut taxes, to eliminate entire agencies and departments. That would be my mission in life, and I'd be happy to work with them to do that. And they're going to, if you think about it, there's no way that there's like a farm team sitting around out there ready to go to help on this. There's just not that many people that are going to have the level of knowledge about how the state government works to do that. I would, and I'd love to help them, but I don't think that I'd be able to do that as easily. If I don't even think I could win running for governor. I actually think I don't think I'd be good at that. But I would be good at working in that type of position. So I'd be happy to do that job. Jason Fisher, 1530. Do you think Sideshow Bob ringtone is "I'm too sexy for my shirt"? He looks like that kind of guy that has to be embarrassingly going off in a meeting. Yeah, I know. I mean, listen, obviously Ferguson's easy to make fun of because he does look like kind of a nerdy guy with the hairpiece and all that stuff. And, he's always trying to show that he's not as weird as he appears. And so he kind of seems to try to go out of his way to be that way. And I don't, I don't. I mean, sometimes I'll mock him myself. He's got a lot of reasons to be mocked, of course, but generally the problem is you just have somebody that's just really terrible. They're just not good people. They're fully corrupt. They've sold their soul long ago. There's no way Bob Ferguson's ever going to be honest. And so he runs, he's a terrible person to have in office. He was a terrible attorney general, and he's going to continue to fumble through being a bad governor. And ultimately you have to replace people like that. At some point in time, the corrupt come. They run out of road, right? They've stolen as much money as they can steal. They've caused as much damage as they can do. They've incompetently fumbled into a disaster zone, and eventually they just run out of real estate, and the other opposition has to step in and take over. Now, people will think that never happens, or they like to be doom and gloomers and pretend like it never happens. But the reality is it usually does. At some point in time, look at Argentina, look at El Salvador. I mean, look at these countries, surprisingly. I mean, countries I've never expect, Peru, and places, things will change. Now, we don't have to go down the road of Argentina and totally nuke ourselves for generations before we make changes. It has been a long time in Washington state since we've had rational, logical, intelligent people who care about the Constitution, freedom, and liberty, and don't want to squander and waste all your taxes and shove it in their supporters' pockets. So it'll be an unusual culture shock in Olympia and state government in our state when that day comes, provided that the people who win those elections aren't focused on their resume or virtue signaling, that they're focused on actually implementing effective and good policy. And it has to be hard, it has to be aggressive, it has to be thorough, it has to be across the board, and it has to be done in a way that reverses so much of this that the benefits within 4 years become obvious economically and otherwise in the state. And that's essentially what they have to do. It's not an easy process. People who think that's easy aren't paying attention to what you have to do to make that happen. And the inevitable bloat of all of the special interests who have been just, living and eating the gravy train. I don't know if you ever, when I was younger, my grandpa used to raise pigs. And so if you ever see big fat pigs, in the trough, like sometimes they'll just lay down and they're practically, on their side, just like getting food because it's easy and it's just easy to do, bear is actually very similar. Years ago when it used to be, I remember seeing a bear that had sat down on a pile of fruit in an orchard. And this bear was just like draped over the fruit, lazy, they just look like they're being as lazy as possible. And they're actually kind of related to pigs if you ever follow them on. But so a bear is sitting there just eating the fruit, and then it's like almost too tired and sitting there. And when it, stirs itself up, it'll just keep eating. Essentially, that's how these special interests and NGOs and grant grifting operations work in the state. They're just so fat and lazy. They're just sitting there bloated, absorbing whatever your tax dollars are they can get. And they've been doing that for a long time. A good percentage of the tax dollars you get are wasted. So the question is, they will suddenly wake up when they realize that gravy train or that pile of slop is going to come to an end. And they'll fight tooth and nail because it's the distributed cost, concentrated benefits problem that we've discussed in the past. Let's see. I'm trying to catch up where I was here. Sorry, some questions came in and I'm losing my direction here. Well, Ferguson already. Okay, here's Living Life 7181. Was Ferguson already ready when he showed up? And did the mayor of Seattle stand him up because she was scared? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how Mayor Wilson in Seattle is obviously a national laughingstock, and so she's becoming kind of a meme for, the worst possible choice a city could ever find to be mayor. Governor Ferguson standing next to her is perfect. Jayapal, the atrocious Jayapal standing next to him as well. These are people who've dedicated their lives destroying Seattle, and so in a way, it's kind of perfect that they're all together, but I don't know how prepared Ferguson was. And obviously, as he's looking at Ferguson at some point in time will distance himself from other Democrats if they're particularly egregious in public. And Mayor Wilson is such a clown that at some point in time, a lot of them are just not going to want to be on the stage with her because nobody, especially if that's your entire aspiration in life and you're trying to put on a facade that you're actually not totally corrupt or you know what you're doing, and you have to stand next to a clown who just constantly is a gaffe machine, you're probably going to start distancing yourself from her. And I imagine Ferguson will end up doing that a little bit as well. Yeah, somebody said, I love this here. What is this? WMD 44110. I'm becoming convinced that it's not an act and they actually are all this incompetent. Yes, they are to some extent. I mean, one of the benefits you get, okay, not everybody's going to be incompetent, right? There's people who are extracting the cash and stealing the money and the resources and diverting it into their own pockets or certainly pockets of their friends or family or however they're setting it up. I don't think those people are incompetent. I think that they're corrupt and dishonest and they're crooks, but they sometimes just need to have puppets in charge of government. So they can elect complete clowns to government, and you'll be looking at exceptionally low IQ and obviously completely unqualified people like the mayor of Seattle, or some of these legislators or Congress people too. And you're looking at them thinking, you know, and this is a mistake I think people will make on the Republican or conservative side. You'll say, man, that clown got elected. I'm way better than them. I can run against them. You probably are way better than them. Your resume is probably way better, but you don't have the machine behind you the way that person does. So they're going to continue to get elected in some of those districts because the gravy train continues to flow when they're there, no matter how goofy they are, no matter how incompetent they are. And so their competence, so going back to how incompetent they are, is probably real. They probably are that incompetent and that dumb, but they're also, what you don't see is that they're basically handled all the time by the bureaucrats and the staff that surround them. And so sometimes they'll come up and lie, and they aren't, then, you know, they will lie by default, but they don't always lie because they think they're lying. Sometimes they're lying because somebody gives them words to say, and that's what they repeat, or that's how they understood what staff told them, and it's a lie, but they're just simply telling what they think it's true, but they're lying because the staff's telling them to lie. And the staff doesn't really have to worry about blowback most of the time because they can excuse it and justify it behind the scenes later, but they also kind of think it's funny because they get to put that politician out there and let them take the dumb lie. I'm trying to think of there's an example like Steve Hobbs right now is going out in line, just like Julie Weiss from King County and some of these other auditors, probably Vicki Dalton, any other auditor that comes out there and says, we don't have any non-U.S. citizens on our voter rolls. Well, that's just a lie. You do. You have lots of them. The question is how many? That's a fair question. I don't know how many exactly. Is it 150,000 in our state? It's 70,000. Is it 50,000? I don't know, because they obviously are going to keep that covered up and concealed. Back when we could get jury declination letters, we could identify there were a bunch. And then, of course, they made it illegal for us to get those. They made those exempt from the Public Records Act. So the methods that we could use to identify the fact that there are plenty of non-U.S. citizens in the voter rolls have pretty much all been denied to us as citizens trying to hold government accountable. And so the benefit that these politicians have is they can come out and lie, and then people say, well, show us your proof. And if you do show them proof, like there's another way to get it, which is you have non-U.S. citizens give you their ballots that they're getting. I've had a couple dozen of those over the years, but most of the time they are concerned because they're here on a green card or H-1B visa or student visa, and they really don't want it to be revealed that they've been registered to vote, usually against their will or knowledge by the Department of Licensing in most cases. And they're just showing me because they're showing me there's a problem, and they want to get off, and nobody will take them off the voter rolls, so they have other issues and problems related to that. And then what will happen, the next argument they'll make, and this is kind of where New Jersey's going, is when they're forced to admit that they've been registering a lot of non-U.S. citizens, they'll come out and they'll say, oh, It's a statistically insignificant number. It's only 5,000 or 10,000 or 15,000, and only about 800 of them voted and canceled somebody else's vote out. So see, the system still works even though we're screwed up and even though we lied to you every day up until now. And we're still lying, but we're giving you a number that's smaller and hoping the story goes away. And if you only share that story with the Seattle Times and King 5 News, they'll slop it up, they'll report what they're supposed to report, and they'll ignore the rest. But inevitably then, if the feds are putting pressure on you to clean up your voter rolls and remove non-U.S. citizens from the voter rolls, and they're going to go public and you have to try to head it off, that number starts to get bigger. So maybe it was 10,000 your first press conference, and then quietly you'll admit that it's 20 or 30 or 50 or 100,000, and that's how they'll do it. And so sometimes that's how elected officials go up there and lie, but they're not necessarily knowingly lying. They're telling what they think is the truth because staffs lied to them or set them up to tell that. And if they're particularly incompetent and stupid and definitely easy to manipulate, then you can just treat them like a puppet. And when they get booted out of office, staff doesn't care. They're planning to co-opt the next guy in anyway. Let's see. Snake River Dams. The barges take the goods to our ports. If they get transported, the goods would go to Canadian ports. I don't know what you're saying there, actually. They do go all the way down the river. Some of them do go to ports, and they get offloaded off the barges into container ships to sometimes a lot of the grain in Washington State does get exported. And that's why one of the reasons why agriculture is kind of a big part of Washington State's economy, even though Microsoft and Boeing and everybody else gets more attention. Agriculture is still nothing to be sneezed at. It's actually a fairly significant export commodity for Washington State. Let's see. Brandenburg, IT-60, Seattle police chief, lives in Illinois, which is what they did say in the news. Rents an apartment in the city of Seattle, presumably, and then takes trips all over the country. Yeah, and so the kind of the scandal that came up is during this recent shooting, he was at some police chief conference. But listen, by itself, being at a conference, it's not as big a deal to me in the sense that these guys are going to go to these conferences sometime, and you can always have a tragedy happen while you're gone. That's why you have a number two in charge while you're gone. Now, if this guy has a history of just doing these conferences all the time, essentially what he's doing is using those conferences as a way to prep his next job when he gets fired in Seattle or decides to leave Seattle. And so that's a problem. And, having some sense of control or direction over his taxpayer subsidized junkets around the state, around the country, that might be something you should look at. Let's see. Christy and Mike Fisk, 452. Do you think Brian Haywood will run for governor in the future? I don't know. I mean, he has not announced that. That's not been something he said. Obviously, I think that would be big headline news if he did it. I'm just identifying him as somebody that would be a logical candidate. The resources, the interest, the name recognition, the desire to fix problems, obviously, and sacrifice a lot of money trying to fix them, and a keen recognition for where these issues are, and I think he is well-spoken and presents himself well. He's not the only potential Republican candidate for governor, but he's one that in my mind would stand out as a front runner at that point in time if he ever were to decide to do it. Now listen, sometimes I wonder, why would somebody with that much going on in your life and that successful, why would you want to be governor? And when you're obviously more intelligent, more capable than the clowns that we put into office over the last 20 or 30 years, and knowing all the grief and abuse you're going to get, just like he's getting right now, just for running these initiatives, why would you want to go down that road? Because it's kind of a masochistic sort of choice that you make in life. If somebody like Brian's going to do way better financially not being in the governor's office, and where somebody like Bob Ferguson, or Inslee, like those guys are useless in the private sector, right? They wouldn't be getting anything, and so their only path to success is to be in the public sector, where you can dumb things down and have people that are not that competent or intelligent or honest, and that's their kind of way of being successful financially. Inslee, it was obviously a clown, and so he was able to manipulate the system enough that he could be governor, but he's obviously totally useless in the private sector, as is Bob Ferguson, whereas somebody like Haywood's obviously proven that he does very well in the private sector. So why would you want to abuse yourself going in the public sector? I mean, it's truly a public service from somebody like that. Whereas when you pull these snakes out of the grass, like Ferguson and Inslee, or even Gregoire before them, these aren't, they don't have a future outside of the political world. So anyway, but we'll see. And nobody's made any announcement like that yet. And this is a question from Terry Kranjovic, 1353. Is there a possibility Oregon will get a conservative? That governor race is close. Yeah, I've seen the surveys in Oregon, and surprisingly, it does look like the governor candidate running against Kotek is doing really well. I'm sorry I don't remember the name right now off the top of my head in Oregon. I should just know that, and I don't. I read the story, though, and it did look like it was an actual really close race. The problem and the question becomes, with all the problems of the voter rolls and the voting system in Oregon, which is very similar to Washington, and they had uncovered thousands and thousands of non-U.S. citizens in their voter rolls, and they had been forced through litigation to remove, it was like hundreds of thousands of people that were fake voters off their voter rolls. Yet, despite all that, how reflective will the voting system actually be, the voting process and program and operation in Oregon be for governor? Have things gotten so bad in Oregon that will they actually get common sense people who, for some reason, have decided they don't like fentanyl addicts robbing their homes all the time, and they've decided maybe even in Portland they should get somebody in there that believes math is real and is functionally capable of reading their state constitution. We'll see. Let's see. Brandenburg, LT60. Ivory Tower communists have ruined the state. Yes, they have. They always do. Wherever they go, terrible destruction, and it always follows in their footsteps. Next question, Jason Fisher jumping in here again. Why do you think we are seeing all these massive warehouse buildings popping up in Clark County? What happened to Clark County railroad plans? I'll tell you why they're popping up is that they are easier to locate there than they are to locate in Oregon. And so distribution centers tend to be better to locate in Washington than they are in Oregon. That's why you're seeing it. It's a way to support Portland without having to be in the hellhole of Portland. That's really why you're seeing that. Let's see. Brad Bogle, T60, $250,000 a year salary goes to one person who supposedly helps the drug addicts under bridges. Yes, that's right. It's a thankless task, and somebody has to do it for $250,000 and fail miserably every single time you go to work and get paid even more next time. That's how it rolls. The homeless industrial complex exists for a reason, and it's to grift as much taxpayer dollars out and make the problem far worse than it ever was before. That is why it exists. Virtue signaling all along the way, pretending that you measure success in the number of dollars you're wasting, rather than people that you're actually getting off drugs, which is not something that they really want to report because they're not helping anybody do that. Let's see. Chris Min B. Black Diamond. Okay. What do you think can be done to save Washington other than what our founding fathers did to stave off the redcoats? Okay, number one, election systems, and to some extent, fixing and addressing some of the defects in Washington states and the obvious defects that exist in the system would be a big step in the right direction. But even in the course of trying to make those fixes and changes and improvements, and trust me, that's one of the most dangerous fights to be involved in, because the left will absolutely do anything and everything they can to silence and stop those of us who care about trying to fix that issue. However, along the way, you do actually make incremental improvements in attention, and you're getting people out there. If you can close the gap in the state legislature, you can help a lot. Ultimately, you do have to win elections at some point in time. It's easier if you have good candidates that are serious candidates that don't require miracles every single minute that they're out there to actually win. And I think that's probably why I mentioned Brian Haywood as an example of somebody running for office. Now, listen, obviously the guy hasn't announced. To some extent, maybe somebody would have to have his head examined if he really did decide he wanted to go down that path. But the reason why you have to be capable of delivering a message and inspiring people with what you're doing. And what I've seen Brian over the last number of years do, just with these initiatives, it seems like he's capable of doing that. He can get up there and speak and deliver messages, stay on message, deal with the media. he's got that experience, and it's not like a learning curve that he would have to go through suddenly when he's running for office. That's helpful. Secondly, obviously the guy has been successful, and he seems to be willing to sacrifice some of his own money to help others. And if he probably would have the ability to maybe not self-fund an entire campaign, he'd probably have the ability to bring in resources to fund his campaign, and certainly would be a credible guy raising money for that campaign. So I think a lot of people would be willing to give him money and support him. Thirdly, he does have name recognition at this point in time. A lot of the candidates that kind of come out of left field and suddenly want to run for office, I think they greatly underestimate the significance and importance of name recognition. And that doesn't just come automatically just because you're on the voter's guide, right, or on the ballot suddenly. People have to understand instinctively who you are and what your name is. Now, they may hate you, and they may or they may love you, but at least if you've got some level of name recognition moving forward, it's a substantial improvement. It's worth a lot of money in being able to go out there and run a campaign because people know who you are. When Rob McKenna ran in 2012, which he was the closest Republican in gap between the Democrat and the Republican to being elected governor, and he came fairly close. He already had a decent amount of name recognition simply because he had been attorney general, and being on the ballot once like that, where everybody already voted for you, and being in the news enough, even just that amount. And he did a pretty good job having a network of people already out there working for him. Rob McKenna came very close. And people underestimate the name recognition value that exists there. So Brian has that potential, but we'll have to see. Brian Haywood. So obviously, again, I'm not trying to run a cheerleading operation for Brian Haywood for governor right now. I'm not. I don't. Somebody will have to check his head and make sure that he's thinking straight if he actually decides he's going to do it. But he could, and if he did, those are kind of some of the fundamental things that you would have that would that would make him a more likely candidate. And then again, other people that are just well known, right? That's but that combination of demonstrating your ability, and probably there's a number of Republican politicians that have done a good job. Jim Walsh, right? Good friend of mine. So he's done a good job getting his high name recognition, clearly skilled, very knowledgeable on the issues. Also, another person. So he would be a credible person to put in there and run for current head of the GOP for the state. So well known. But not the ability to probably self-fund, which is a different benefit that you would probably get with Brian Haywood's campaign. So I don't know. I mean, obviously, compared either one of those types of guys or any Republican, frankly, that you pull out of anywhere would be better than a Democrat. Honestly, you could probably pull a fentanyl addict out of one of the camps up in Seattle and run them. And if they were able to win over a Democrat, that would still be a better outcome than having Ferguson in there. But we really do need good people to run in because there's a lot that needs to be cleaned up. And just because you're better than Ferguson doesn't mean that that's good enough to win a race. So you need a lot more than just that. And we'll see what happens. But elections are a big part of this process. Somebody said, yeah, Juice 6459, playing incompetent fools is a strategy to obfuscate that their agenda of destroying the country as founded. Sure. I mean, it is a defense mechanism. That's why I said my definition of government is an mountain of corruption that's concealed by an ocean of incompetence. So, and that's why. Sean, former artist, L. John Cusack. I know this isn't about Washington, but its neighbor Oregon, chances of Drazen, that's who it is, Drazen, okay, winning the governor's race this November. It looks pretty close. By all accounts, compared to most races recently, this is the closest governor's race that Oregon's going to have. But again, there's a lot of distance between now and then. The Democrats can read the same polls that everyone else does, and they desperately need their grifting operations in Oregon, just like they need them in California or Massachusetts or Illinois or any other place. So they're going to do anything and everything they can to hold on to that gravy train and keep it flowing. They don't want to lose that. Let's see. Miss Minder Sue, we need more conservatives to run for office and bring sane common sense back I agree. Not a question, but I do agree with that comment. With that, we've been doing this for about an hour and 15 minutes. I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Just a quick reminder, again, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up. The people that sit back and complain and pretend like suddenly things will just suddenly change because somehow they're going to do it on their own and they don't want to be involved in taking the extra 30 seconds or 5 minutes it takes to fill out that ballot and send it in, because after all, the world's corrupt and it doesn't matter. You're not really helping things. Essentially, evil and bad things happen because mostly of apathy and ignorance. And apathy, laziness is not going to be what allows us to prevail ultimately and fix some of the problems that are here. Ultimately, we have to do that at some point in time. We do. And if you don't fix it in Washington, running away to Idaho is simply delaying the inevitable. I just recently had a meeting with a variety of people that are involved all around the states, mostly in the red states, and they're suddenly waking up to the fact that they've already been infected with dumb, bad ideas out of places like Washington State, and they're losing the fight because of the laziness and incompetence of the Republicans who are in those states. They don't even see it coming. They think it's fun to laugh at Washington or Oregon and California, and they should. They should mock us every opportunity they have, but they don't realize that, like a bad disease, horrible things that happen here essentially spread there. They're already hiring dumb, bad staff members. Evergreen State College students that can't find a spot in Washington go work in these other government agencies, and they'll go to Idaho and South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana and Wyoming and Oklahoma and all these other places, and they'll get hired there, and they bring their dumb, bad, terrible ideas with them, and next thing you know, they're changing it. They might be making it look like it's conservative, but it's not. It's the same dumb, bad ideas. You defeat it in a place like Washington State, and you stop a lot of the poisonous distribution of bad ideas into those other places. You also provide an opportunity for radical and good and effective policy changes here that can demonstrate the difference between having a beautiful, wonderful state that's underutilized and with higher unemployment and bad opportunities for people to live here, and suddenly you flip that switch back to an entrepreneurial state and an opportunity-driven state and a state with a lot of other natural resource advantages that exist here. And when you suddenly see that change, we actually put criminals in jail. We don't import as many drug addicts as possible. We don't turn the city of Seattle into essentially a Mexican drug cartel operation. When you reverse a lot of those problems and you start to fix what's going on here in the state, that demonstration helps also destroy the leftist ideology moving forward. But it does require people to show up and be involved and engaged. So with that, I want to just remind everybody, we're only a week away from the election. It's important to make sure you get those ballots in. Do not trust the post office. Do not wait till the last minute. Get it in, drop it in the mailbox, in the drop box, or get as close to that auditor's office as you can. Nothing's perfect, but that's better than nothing, and that's better than throwing it in the post office. And get it in there. Get in there as soon as you can. Vote for reasonable, decent people, and let's see how things go. It's a very low turnout election. It always is. So getting more of your ballots in that counts more than ever will, even in the general election. And with that, enjoy the summer, enjoy your family, pay attention to your neighbors, help out when you can, do good things, and remember to show up. And until next time, and I hope you enjoy the videos that I launch later this week.